All right, welcome YouTubers. Let's pause a little bit at the start of this beginning of this co-working stream. We're going to flip everything on its head here, and instead of putting out 7-hour long co-working videos on YouTube, which take forever to upload. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I had a 13-hour video, and I was going to have to break the video up in order to even upload it. So we're going to try something new. We're only going to add to the YouTube video the summations at the end of any pomo break. So that should make your videos a lot longer. In fact, I'm really hoping that the video you're watching right now is not longer than an hour. And what that'll mean that you'll get the highlights of what was done during the last pomo session, because I'll summarize them and come off, mute or whatever. The other great thing about this is this means that during the working time, I can turn the music on. Everybody on Twitch can get work done, and I can stop talking. So that I can focus and I can get more work done. And I'm also losing my voice. I can't talk for 13 straight hours. It's just stupid. I don't know what I was thinking. So hopefully that'll be great. So based on that, we're taking our first promo break here. These co-working sessions are messy, but hopefully they'll be more summarized for you going forward. Anyway, so what are we doing? Well, last we left, I was working on the klogin program for work and for home. Number of things here, but it's actually best summarized in the file that I've been updating, which contains the description that will be in the help text. And this is not markdown. This is just a file, and you can go ahead and read it, but pause the video and read it. But it's a klogin tool. It's an OIDC login tool. You've been following me on this. You know what it does. This actually goes through the changes from the original one that I had. It uses TLS validation using OIDC queries, preventing potential man-in-the-middle attacks instead of putting on insecure TLS no verify. If you don't know what that means, you probably don't care. Allows changing between different usernames in a given cluster modally. So it'll be like, and then so there's like 3 reserved cluster names: dev, prod, and inf. And then if you want to change the username up, that username will be displayed in the auth info section. So when you type context here, you're going to now see, instead of just dev here, which has always been kind of a confusing thing, you'll now see what the user is at dev. Yesterday, I decided, after great pain and suffering, to only allow 3 contexts, to only care about 3 reserved contexts: dev, prod, and inv. Anything else that's saved is not messed with. This is the first time this particular tool is going to do the right thing there. That includes the namespace of the currently logged in context. So like this one, for example, here's a perfect example, right? So this is logged in using the namespace to match the user, which is the default. But if I wanted to change the namespace of this context, it would still log in to the inf cluster, and the namespace would be respected. It wouldn't be overridden every time. So those are all things that, probably seem like no-brainers and obvious, but the program wasn't doing that before. Corrects the problems preventing Kubernetes dashboard to work. So Kubernetes dashboard, Kubernetes proxy uses the access token in the OIDC auth info section. And we were able to get around that problem by not using the OIDC auth info type, provider type, and using instead the OIDC JWT ID bearer tokens, which are just one-liners. When you look into the file, this is just give you a version of this. So now we just have the one-liners. If you've opened up your kubeconfig file and you've looked at here under the username and provider section, you know that if you're using the OIDC stuff, the provider, you got a lot of extra stuff. They got the refresh, access token, and all that stuff is in there. It's completely unnecessary to have it in there if you're using owner resource type. Owner resource password flow, which is based on LDAP, which is just username and password, even though that's deprecated in 2.1. So what we get a much simpler entry here. It's just a JWT token, period. And this actually works with kubectl proxy, which allows, if you install the dashboard, it allows users to use your dashboard, which was the trigger. That was the catalyst for this entire thing. We were actually not populating. There's a buggy version that we have right now that uses access. That uses the ID underscore token, and it does not provide the access token. information. So therefore, the proxy stuff that's used by the dashboard doesn't work. I don't know why. All I know is that the dashboard using OIDC doesn't work that way unless you change the name of the token. Even though it tells you very explicitly in the Kubernetes security documentation to use ID underscore token as opposed to access token. So either it's a bug in Kubernetes that we're avoiding, or we've fixed some bug in how the OIDC was stored. I don't care because the dashboard works now, and I only have one line in my auth info section for each one. So 13 hours of talking while Zwifting. Not happening. So another thing too is we switched over to Cobra for completion and we dropped Bonsai. Sad day for me. The primary motivation for that is because we now have support for Z Shellfish and PowerShell completion. Bonsai needs it, it doesn't have it. So that is the single number one reason to do that. The other people ask, why are you not using Bonsai? And that's it. I find Cobra's, documentation to be woefully inadequate and ugly. If and when I want to, I can actually take it over. I can hijack the entire help function template or that generates the help documentation, so I can actually use exactly what I use for Bonsai if I want to do that later. In which case, I get all the completion stuff from Cobra with the good help from Bonsai at the cost of a bunch of total bullshit code to create Cobra commands, which don't allow import composition, which Bonsai does, but that's only valuable to people that are maintaining the code base. That's not valuable to everybody else. So that's not going to be enough to overrule the decision to use Cobra, particularly since everything used Cobra because it was first to market, unfortunately. So that's what's happening there. We also, this particular klogin, I rolled my own OIDC flow last time I did this. So now we are using the official Go OIDC package. We're also using the recently discovered official CLI runtime package, which includes writes. And I cannot overstate how important it is to do that. Anybody who is not doing that right now is screwing with files in a way that is inconsistent with the way kubectl sees those config files and will likely cause problems eventually. So I cannot overstate how important it is to take the moment, if you're just watching this, to know what that means. Look up the CLI runtime package. You can look up my source code if you want. We have spent many, many hours arriving at this code through, it's not documented, a lot of it, arriving at this code to get a proper OIDC authentication request, and more specifically this, creating new cluster entries for the context file for the kubeconfig file, and properly calling modify config, which writes that config wherever it is. And if you don't know what that means, kubeconfig allows a path list separated by colons or semicolons, depending on your OS. And those things can be split. A cluster and an auth info section and context can be in completely separate files. And I know nobody does that, but it could be, right? So the only way to properly save to the right file is exactly the same as kubeconfig. And this was literally ripped straight out of kubectl set context. So you can go in there and you can see this. It uses the conf.clusters object, which is the magical API.cluster object, which is, that's like the master one, right? It's this, and I also, if you don't know already, I wrote another program called kubeconf. kubeconf actually, all it does is dump the API.config object, so you can see about how these things relate to one another. Modify conf actually is in instructions that says you should only call it once for any specific changes that happen to something that has a location of origin, because it actually opens up all these files and writes them independently. Obviously, I don't have a lot of files there. It's just the one file. But if I did, they would all be shown in location of origin would be there. And that gives you something to actually query. That's much better than kubectl config view. It's just not redacted and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's like way, way better. So you can do contexts, pipe that to keys if you want. You know what I mean? I mean, this is a way to access that. So what am I doing today? Right now, I'm kind of behind. I want to get this done. I need to get this binary in people's hands. It's driving me crazy, but it's so important that they have this documentation written. And I'm not going to go through the rules here, but suffice it to say that these rules very explicitly explain what happens if you call klogin against a specific thing, and how to do that. So that's all that's doing. So if you were to read those rules, you could go ahead and see. We don't want any user to be confused. But primarily, the only main thing that's changing is that they're going to get a new user in the auth info section, so they know explicitly what user they're logged in as. So if they change their namespace, they know that they're still using whatever other user. It's also, for the first time ever in the history of klogin, in the last 4 or 5 years of us using it, it allows them to change their active user for a given cluster. Couldn't do that before. Before, it was assumed from their current active login of their machine. It wasn't something that they could pass in, and it definitely wasn't remembered between that. It would always be added new, and it was inferred from other places. So that is a huge win, because we have developers who are sometimes logging in multiple times a day into the same namespace, even as a different user, to do different things depending on and particularly if you've got admins. So and this is great, because now our context is going to show what user they're currently logged in as, or what user they last logged in as, so that when they do klogin enter, it'll automatically assume their last user that they used properly. It's not gonna do it wrong. Before, we used to assume that based on what their namespace was, and that was making a real stretch of an assumption, saying that the namespace matched the user ID, and that never does. That's totally stupid. So that is a huge win. That, and the use of TLS validation by saving the cert.ca data into the cluster. Those are the three main things: the use of the fixing of the dashboard, and the use of context. The use of the dashboard, the addition of TLS validation, so we actually are safe now against the man-in-the-middle attacks. And thirdly, not stopping on the config file and more explicitly showing them what auth info, what user specifically is logged in, so they know. That is the end of this break. I will get back in touch with you in a bit. I'm going to go finish making my eggs, and then I'll be back to finish writing that documentation. Before we leave, I did want to show you that I've chosen to put my documentation in a separate file. I did do some research to discover that whether this is a template or not. You can actually take that over, but I'm currently not doing that. Wait, what happened here? In which case, klogin. I broke something there. Can be tried again. All right, there we go. So what I was going to say is you can do go install, and this should actually give me the docs now. So login, -h. All right, so you see all this documentation up there, my friends? This documentation up here, that was all maintained in a txt file, and that txt file was embedded, so that if you're not using Go Embed, you really need to. It's just so cool. It's so cool because you can have your resources completely separate, right? So that's what we do here. Let me just show you that a little bit here. So this description here is just a string, and this is how you embed the string. You have to have this line here, and you need to import _space : embed. And then you can actually just dump it that way. So that's it for this POMO. Talk to you soon. Hey there, this is Already Big Rob TV. And it is time for a break here at the POMO. It's the top of the hour. It's been more than an hour, but lots of stuff to do here. I had meetings and stuff, but let's capture what the main purpose of this now finished klogin tool is going to do for us. Short of some tweaking, I need to do the overall algorithm in the main top level code, which should go pretty quickly. This is what it does, and this is the documentation from the new release notes. So If you are still wondering why the hell am I making this klogin tool for myself here at home and for a similar tool at work, not the same tool, but a similar tool at work, this is why. So we're using TLS certificate validation for all OIDC queries, preventing potential man-in-the-middle attacks. If you look in your kubectl, your kubeconfig file of any kind, and under your root and your custom root CA, if you see under this section for hey Brillin, if you see, I'm going to show you, right? So if you see this, if you do not see certificate authority data for any of your clusters, and you see instead insecure skip TLS verify or validate, whatever, you are subject to man-in-the-middle attacks. If you're doing this internally, then that's obviously not as big an issue because your network is somewhat protected, but it's bad practice to do that. You shouldn't be doing it. We've been doing it for 4 or 5 years, and we're not doing it anymore. So that's the first thing that's going to be fixed. That took a considerable amount of effort to get that corrected. I had to set up Keycloak internally on my lab here. I had to set up 3 Kubernetes clusters with different root CAs. They had to have their own root CA, and then I had to set up the root CA for our overall internal network in order to even simulate how to fix that. So we spent a considerable amount of time getting that fixed, and that's the main thing that's fixed. The next problem that's fixed is we are fixing a problem with the Kubernetes dashboard, which I talked about earlier, which was affecting kubectl proxy from not working because of using the OIDC provider. It was not seeing access token, which it requires if it's set like that. Otherwise, it uses just the ID token. So I already talked about that, but it easily allows changes between different users for a given cluster. Talked about that before in our overview. So when I do context, I can log in as a different user into inf or dev or whatever, and I can change it up, and that will be displayed in the auth info section. That's a change that's coming. It allows or respects existing configurations. So except for the reserved configurations, contexts, and clusters that have been configured in internal clusters, which are hard-coded, that includes client ID, issuer, that includes the, let me just show you. It includes these embedded certs, PEM files for the certs, which become the CA data. And then you have the issuer URLs, the hard-coded and embedded client IDs, client secrets if you have them, which are not secret, by the way, right? They're just not. This password flow does not mean a client secret is actually secret. So that data, this information, by the way, compared to previous versions of klogin, has been considerably simplified because we are using .well-formed discovery of OIDC from the OIDC issuer URL because we are using the correct correct library. We're using the OIDC, the CoreOS Go OIDC library for all of our OIDC issuer queries. Before, that was hand grown. It was hand spun using NetHTTP and interactions with the issuer, as opposed to using the well-established, already existing methods of getting a provider and pulling down all the data you need through discovery. So the migration to use Go IIDC was a huge deal. I'm glad we did that. And we've also simplified. We're using 24-hour OIDC JWT tokens, which is just the expiration period we've set for our bearer tokens using this particular client authorization flow. We have tab completion now because we're switching to Cobra for Bash, ZShellfish, and PowerShell. And we use the official industry standard packages, CLI runtime, client Go, Go IIDC, and Cobra. We reserve and respect multi-file list paths and kubeconfig, same as kubectl. I was not doing that before. We were blowing away existing configurations no matter where they lived, and we always assumed it was in their home directory, which is a really bad thing to do. Don't do it. Use the CLI runtime and use modify conf when you need to write. It's the only way to properly write data to a Kubernetes configuration file. It is literally the only way to do it. If you do it any other way, unless you're breaking it, unless you've literally I completely copied the internal runtime code from the CLI runtime and the API config object. Seriously, if you are writing something that sort of is in the space of a plugin or kubectl or along those lines, and it needs to talk to the API, to the Kubernetes API, and you are not using the CLI runtime, you are doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong, and you're going to be very sad. You're going to break something someday if you don't do that. So it's as crappy as this particular source code is, it is still the right way to do it, because that's the same thing kubectl does. It's the same thing kubeadm does. It's the same thing that any number of other tools do, right? And it comes with standard kubectl like global parameter parsing, POSIX parameter parsing for free. So you get all of that as well. So you don't have to rewrite all of the support for all of those command line arguments if you don't want to. I am super emphasizing this particular point because that one point alone, using the CLI runtime library and the Go IDC is a big one, but those two things alone, seriously, if you are making anything that interacts with Kubernetes at all from the command line and you are not using that and you think you can roll your own, you are broken. I promise you, you're broken today, and you probably want to look at that. All right, so that's going to be enough on that. We contain 0 execs of kubectl. The other safe way, before knowing about the CLI runtime and the API.config object, which has modify conf, for doing all of this safely without doing any subshells or sub-exec calls, the only safe way to make any changes to the configuration would be, of course, through this kubectl config program, right? And I used to do that, actually. I encapsulated, I wrapped up a bunch of kubectl config, set this, set that, which underneath is calling the CLI runtime to make all of its changes, right? That's where we got it from. And that is the only safe way to do that. If you're writing shell code or Python code, you have to do that because there's no such thing as a CLI runtime for Python or for Bash or anything like that. In fact, I'm just going to say it. If you are a platform engineer or you are a toolsmith and you are writing any tools whatsoever, cool tools, apps, whatever, that interact with the Kubernetes API at any level, which allow the changing of namespace or something like that, or even a slight inclination of like what would be possible with kubectl options. If you are writing any code that interacts with the Kubernetes API and also is run from the command line, if you're not writing that in Go, you're broken. I'm telling you, you're broken. The Python API has to play catch up with the client Go library, which is the official library that's used by Kubernetes itself. So let me put it out there. Why would you write code that uses a library that constantly has to play catch up with the official Kubernetes code, when you could write it in Go and use the same exact code as kubeadm and kubectl? Why? Why would you do that? Why would you put yourself at risk? Why? Well, there's the standard. Look, I'm just gonna set it, put it in stone. The standard Kubernetes Go API, client Go API library is the standard. Now you can cite precedent for Kubernetes being a standard and not having any specific language all you want. That's fine. Go be my guest. Be my guest. You can go ahead and argue that all you want. But at the end of the day, Helm, Kubernetes, kubectl, kubeadm, and every other tool that matters in the universe uses kates.io/client Go to talk to the API. And it uses CLI-runtime in order to get the parsing of the configuration files correct. If you are not writing your apps in Go and you're not using those libraries, you're broken. You're either broken or you're going to be broken. And you should be putting in place plans to migrate off your shitty Python and Bash code or whatever the hell you're using and start writing that shit in Go, because that is the standard. You can flame me all you want, and that's fine. I'll use my extra time not chasing down bugs because I'm using the standard code while you run around using stuff that's constantly trying. Even this code still has problems, right? I had to actually debug a problem in the official in the official client runtime problem because it has an dependency interaction that didn't work, and I had to lock down the checksum in order to get it to work. So even this has problems. I can't possibly imagine trying to keep track of all the inconsistencies in whatever other your favorite language is for talking to the Kubernetes API. I look, the Kubernetes code is shit. It's shit, but at least it's consistent shit. And it is the stuff that is being used. If you're writing applications and tools and you call yourself a platform engineer in the cloud native space and you're not coding in Go, fuck you. You're doing it wrong. Next on Artifacts, Rob, Python CLI runtime implementation. No way. No way. I'm sorry. It wouldn't be Artifacts, Rob, if you didn't get at least one opinionated rant out of me per break. That's it, though. I've already gone 10 minutes over. My break is over. It's time for me to get back to work. Here's some music. If you have something else you want to say, let me know. The next break, my goal for the next POMO is to actually have this code written and compiled so that this documentation shows up in the output. I moved these things to the release notes and the README, which is pretty cool because Go Releaser actually bundles the README. That's why I spent some time removing any of the template-specific documentation from the README.md file. This is a Golang template, by the way. If you want to get access to the source code, github.com/rtvxrob/klogin. If you go there, you can get it. You'll see that it's a template. The reason it's a template is because this will not work for you. You need to make your own, and you need to customize internal clusters with your own client ID, issuer, OIDC issuer information, and then compile that. And the point being is that now you're saving your end users from having to pre-configure their Kube login when they install it, which is what Kube login does. It's a piece of shit software. I would never suggest anybody use it. It's much, much better for you to create your own login tool and embed the client ID and the issuer stuff, and then just issue a new one when you need it, in my opinion. I think that's the way to do it. This might not work for you, though, because this does use the deprecated password resource owner resource password authentication, which is not even supported by 2.1 OAuth. However, pretty much every enterprise that uses LDAP on the planet still uses that and requires it. It's a non-web-based interaction. It is also not supported by Authentic. Everybody's telling me to use Authentic. I'm like, I'll stick with my Keycloak, please, because it actually supports it. And what does that mean? That means if you go to Keycloak here, you can there are links to these stuff out there. If you go to Keycloak and you go to the clients and the credentials, oops, gonna have to reload my super secret admin password. Yeah, you don't want to know that. Oh my god, it's like, why are you using such stupid? So that is the settings. Here's the endpoint configuration, and you can tell it can, where does it go in? Login policies. No, that's not it. What am I looking for? Clients. So clients registration. No. Minikube prod. Oh, here we go. Credentials, client ID, and secret. That's fine. That's only if you have non-confidential. By the way, you don't need secret if you don't make your client IDs secret, or confidential is the word I use. Client scopes, authorization, sessions, keys. I'm trying to find flows. There we go. Flows. Direct access grants. So a direct access grant is otherwise known as owner. What is it? Resource owner password flow. And there we go. In terms of OAuth 2 specification, this enables support for resource owner password credentials grant for this client. That is what we're talking about. 2.1 doesn't support it, but we need it. If you're using LDAP passwords, you need that. If you use standard flow, you have to have the paste token here kind of stuff. And we don't have that. We may eventually add it, but just know that Klogin does not support that particular flow. I may add it. I may be forced to add it, but I may add it because I also want to as an option. So if you want to support a more standard OAuth flow, you should be able to support either of them, in which case I would add a configuration variable to internal clusters, and I would identify the flow to use, in which case the Klogin tool itself would say, click on this URL, log in, and cut and paste the token that comes out of it. And that would include customizing a redirect page to display the token in order to cut and paste it, paste it into your command line tool. That is not included in the scope of Klogin currently, so that's why I'm saying that. But mostly I showed you this because I removed all the wording that referred to template or fix this template, because this readme.md file is going to be bundled using Go Releaser along with the license file using the default Go Releaser settings bundled into the zip or the tarball that gets distributed and created as an automated release when triggered as a GitHub action anytime I tag a release. Kubernetes is a nightmare. No one should ever use it. Man, I love this guy. I love you too. Python helps me heat my room. A lot of fun stuff from the regular community. It's time for me to get back to work, so I'll report back in an hour. Have fun. See you later. Okay, you're listening to artifactsrob.tv. It is time for a break. And just to catch you up a little bit, not a lot has happened in the last hour. A lot of factoring, a lot of recoding. I decided to refactor the root command, this Cobra root command for the klogin tool, to use some simplified logic. So I'm going to factor some of this out into a login function. Actually, had it into login specific and login default. So klogin with no arguments, klogin with an argument, and realized I could probably take care of that logic up here at the top level inside of the runny anonymous function that's set to the root command. That leaves us with a single login function that takes the Cobra command, which I'm using X to indicate that just from my bonsai conventions, and then passing the configuration, the API.config, which is where the magic happens. Earlier I was like ranting about it. You're doing it wrong unless you use this. If the API.config object is the authoritative data related to the parsing of all possible kubeconfig files. It is also what is represented by the kubeconfig, the kubeconf utility that I built some days ago that you can go look at. That includes the location of origin and keys for everything. This is it, right? So this is also the struct, the type that is updated when you call out to modify config. You pass one of these API.config objects to that in order to update and write all those changes to the individual files. So that's what's going on there. So we're just fetching. This is the definitive way to pull all configurations from all kubeconfig files in the identical method that kubectl does. So if you are not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong, as I've said before. You really are. That pulls in that data, and then we get that conf object, which is, the master of the universe with regard to those values, and we pass that around along with the command itself, since this is, a Cobra command. So these methods need to have that, because that is an anonymous function, which is not a method. It's not tied off of it. It's an anonymous function assigned to runny. And if there's a username, we're going to go ahead and prompt using my run prompt library. We do parse potential username, so it could be klogin user at dev. If there's a parse user intelligently detects whether there's an at in there, and if so, returns the uname. If there's not, it returns just the CL name, and uname would be empty in that case. You probably put this one first. So that, what does that do? That says, hey, I don't have a uname, and go ahead and prompt for it. Otherwise, if I don't have a cluster, the only case where you wouldn't have a cluster is if they did uname at and then didn't put anything, which is valid, just stupid. But if they happen to do that, then we set the cluster default, which is prod. That was added. That's in internal /clusters. That's part of the hard-coded. It's got the client ID, issuer OIDC URL, and all of that in it. And then we hand off the login. So this is actually going to need to change now. What I could probably do? I could probably factor that out right now. Yeah, I can put that down here now. Yeesh, I don't need to do this anymore. No, I can actually call that and then just clean up the stuff and get those arguments, which is nice because this is a top level function. So that high level logic about what happens to the argument is really kind of relevant. The low level stuff got kind of messy. That's what all this leftover code down here is. This code has all been written, so it's just refactoring what already exists. All that code is all one big last, long run function before, and that's getting cleaned up into different parts. So we're parsing off the argument list and dealing with the arguments properly at the highest level, and then the low level login code can be factored out, which frankly could be and probably should be put into one of those internal packages that I have, probably under the auth package now that I think about it. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to instead of leaving this at the high level, I'm going to factor out that login to be auth.login. There's really no reason to pass the command anymore. So if I pass the configuration object, I really don't even need to pass. Actually, no, I do. I need to pass that because I need to know what to change and what to update, right? So I could probably take those off. So that's what will happen. That's what I'll do in my next break. I've got 52 minutes to go. So when I come back, I'll factor out that login high-level method, and then that can be called from anywhere, this command or another. So this is actually good. This refactoring is really good because that logic is now reusable where it wasn't before. Really, the only thing you should be doing in a Cobra command at the high, I mean, this is for Bonsai or Cobra, anything that's in the run E or the run method, honestly, you should really only have a few lines in there that are dealing with the arguments, and you should put all of the other business logic, they call it, right? The important stuff should be someplace else. It should be in either internal or an exported function. Well, do we have somebody just look in? It should be someplace else, what I'm trying to say. So we need to put that someplace. Why? Because we need to reuse it. It needs to be testable, right? We can't write a unit test case against the running function easily, especially not when we got all those argument parsing. So that shit should be factored out. In other words, if your Cobra commands have really, really multi-page long run-y functions in them, they're probably written wrong. You should probably clean that up and put that high-level business logic into a separate function. Internal, exported, private, whatever, it just should be somewhere else. It should not be in here. The Cobra command function, the running function, should be primarily to deal with turning arguments into high-level function calls, and then those high-level function calls should be someplace else. So that's going to be it. There needs to be more than one person working on this. Well, there could be, but for right now, this is all I need. This is just me being done with this. But yeah, we're about done with this application. I'll be done with this program very soon, probably within a couple hours. I don't know if I'm going to make the cycling time for tonight. Let's see. It says I'm going to go cycling at 8 o'clock. One way or another, I'm going to go biking. So I'm going to stream for another hour. Then I'm going to go biking. And I'll probably be back later tonight to do a little bit more work on this if I don't finish it. I need some binaries in the Slack chat. I need to put them out there for people to use tonight so they can start to give it a try on at least today, over Friday, over the weekend. So this refactoring needs to be done. It may be that I just continue to push back my bike riding until this code is done. I mean, we're very, very, very close to being finished. Again, this is just refactoring code that already works. So I'm going to push the sweat and chat back to 10 tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and finish this code. And then tomorrow early in the morning, before I even probably stream, I don't know, I'll be creating a work facing version of this binary, which is largely going to have the same logic in it, but not entirely. So that's where we are. Here's some more music. We're going to go back on our Pomo session, get some work done. We'll talk to you in an hour. Shri Ram, JJ Ram. You're listening to RDBXRob.tv. Maybe you're watching it with me. And it is break time. That means it's been at least an hour since I have last talked. And it's time for me to catch you up on what has happened. Audio started to crackle on that one. Yeah, my soundboard's got problems. It's had problems for some time. It's funny because it's only with the digital stuff that has that problem. The analog doesn't have that problem. Isn't that weird? That only happens if I have the USB cable plugged in. Crazy, kind of weird. All right, so a quick summary of what I did, and then I'm going to go ahead and stop and start again because I want to be done for the night. A couple of things we did. We factored out the authentication into something called, so it's in my internal package called auth. So it would be auth.login ROPC, stands for resource owner password credentials. And that is the flow that we use. It's sometimes called direct access. Keycloak calls it that. Or password type equals password. As you can see, we've got some documentation on how this goes about doing its thing. Bulk of the time this last hour was spent writing the code that cleans up the arguments and updates the loaded configuration API config object, which I talked about in the last break, so that when we pass it off to the login ROPC function, it will have everything that's needed. In particular, it just turned out to be easier to do that. So if there's not a current configuration, a current context set in the API.config struct, we go ahead and add one, and then we set it to that. Otherwise, we update that data. We also infer the username and the cluster identifier from the arguments, either from the arguments or to klogin, or from, if there's no arguments, the current cluster. If there's not a current cluster, then we grab the defaults and we prompt for a user. Something that's important about this is that I talked about this in the last break, but I believe you should not be doing interactive things in your high-level functions. I mean, that's usually a very bad idea. So, because anytime you use interactivity and you're going to read from standard input or something like that, you're making that function completely broken if it's used in anything that could be damaged by blocking, waiting on data. So one criteria that I strongly admit, I'm really pedantic about it, is that if you're going to read input at all, keep that in the Cobra run or run E function, because that's already designed to be interactive. There's a very good chance that you're, and if not, if you don't want to be blocking on that, you can then pull in flag data or something like that, and it'll all look normal to somebody who's already familiar with how the Cobra command structure works. So that's what's going on there. We've got length target, and so we're parsing the user. If the length is 0, we're parsing the user from a default target. We're setting the target. Target is just a string that's either user at dev, or user at, dev being just representation of what the thing would be, and that makes our conditional code a lot cleaner up here, because we just have to see if we have an argument. If we don't, grab the current user. If not, the current context. If not, build it up, and then set the target to be the auth info from the current context. And then I put this in the documentation for the login ROPC function, but it is now finicky about the kind of API.config it gets. If the current context does not have a user at prod or whatever auth info, it will bark and say, hey, sorry, your current context is not set up correctly. So this stuff that's happening in here is to clean up the API.config object before it gets written and before it gets used to do logging in. And then when we call it, we can safely use login ROPC to persist that in-memory copy of the configuration data that may or may not have been changed up, and then we could go ahead and save that, right? So setting the current context and all that stuff. Basically, what we're doing is we're setting up a perfect. We're taking the API conf that exists, config that exists. We're slurping that up from files wherever that is, using official methods from the command line runtime tool. runtime package, and then we're massaging the current context, either using it or massaging it or fixing it based on our potential combination of arguments and everything, so that by the time we get all the way done with that and we call login RPC, we now have what we think is a perfect looking conf object. The only thing missing from the conf struct at that point will be the addition of the cluster entry for the target cluster, if that doesn't exist, the auth info once we get the token, of course, and we will not have to add the context. So that will have already been added before auth login RPC gets called. So this turns out to be kind of nice, because we're sort of using this like data blob, API.config to keep the state of everything that we want, and we created the context up front inside of the memory of the newly created API.config or loaded, so that part's already done, and then we use that essentially as arguments to login RPC. And so login RPC inspects the conf data specifically for that, and then does its magic, logging in, and then if it does actually successfully log in, it goes to the root CA, and if it successfully logs in, then it adds the entry to the cluster section and the entry to the user's auth info section credentials, and then it saves it. In fact, we might be. I have to test whether client command.modify config, which I said is the way to persist the data safely to kubeconfig files. If we only have to call it once, if this works, we'll only have to call that once. But the documentation for that file is a little leery. Let me just see if I can pull it up for you. So client command dot modify conf. Is that it? Is it config? I wonder. There it is. Modify config. This is where the persistent magic happens. So let's read this. This takes config access, which is this random thing we have to load that tells it we're going to set it to use the default permissions. That's sort of like the profile of how modify config is going to access those underlying location of origin files. And then we have the new config client. Here we go. So that's the passed in config object. Interestingly, it is not a. I find this interesting, but it is. I don't believe it's a pointer. I think it's an actual value. It's I don't know. It's just yet another example of questionable code here. Relativized paths is true. We just always put that for true for some reason. I don't know why. Just using what kubectl does. And so let me read it. Modify config takes the config object, iterates through the cluster's auth infos and contexts, uses the location of origin if specified, or uses a default destination file to write the results into. This results in multiple file reads, but it's very easy to follow. Preferences and current context should always be set in the default destination file, since we can't distinguish between empty and missing values, so no nil strings. We're forced have separate. That's what they wrote. I didn't. We're forced to have separate handling for them. In the kubeconfig cases, that's in other words, you have multiple, right? New config should have at most one difference. That means that this code will only write into a single file. If you want relativized paths, you must provide a fully qualified path in any modified element. I think relativized paths has something to. I'd have to read the source code. There's literally no additional documentation on that. I believe this has something to do with the location of origin, whether that's a full path or a reference. I can show you again. I created the kubeconfig tool for this very purpose, to see what is actually in the API config object that gets passed. So as you can see here, we have location of origin, we have this full path name, right? So I think that relativized thing has something to do with that, but I'm just doing what kubectl does, so I'm confident that that'll be the right thing. But who knows? You know, I it's kind of troublesome. The sentence here that gives me the most grief is this: in the kubeconfig cases. What the hell does that mean? I mean, really, what the hell does that mean? In the kubeconfig cases, that's pretty much every case. New config should have at most one difference. So that means that this code will only write into a single file. What I think that means is that if you made more than one change to the new config object coming in per location of origin, that only one of them is going to get written. And there's no way I can really know what that's going to do until I test that. That is this craziest, scariest documentation I've ever read. The reason I'm interested in that is because I actually do change the clusters section and we change I'm just trying to think. It says here it's just a multiple file reads. So if I'm adding anything new, right? If we add anything new, and we're going to add a new cluster entry, right? I mean, it's possible we're adding a new cluster entry. Like, it's the first time they run it and they run prod for the first time and they have nothing created, then calling this once to create the new cluster, auth info, and context all at once, I believe this is saying that it would all happen in one file. And in this case, the default file would be the default destination file. This is one of those things where trying it out and seeing what it does is going to actually get us what we want. But right now, I currently call modify config once for every change I ever make. So if I change anything to any of the clusters, then I call modify config. If I change, even if it's 6 lines down, you know, then if I change, if I add the context and I want that persisted, I save it on that. You see what I'm saying? And then if I want to change that, if I want to change the auth info to add that, then I call modify config after that also. So I get 3 or 4 or 5 modify config calls. In the past, I used to have 3 or 4 or 5 kubectl config set whatever, which was, you know, full-blown executable calls. So I'm going to try something new here in the next break. I'm going to try to do one modify config call with having updated the in-memory API.config object, and we'll see if it saves it into the right place. Worst case scenario, it will save all of it into the default destination file, which 99.9% of people are going to be doing anyway. So I think that's going to be the thing. By the way, it doesn't tell you anything here about the default destination file, but I happen to know from extensive, painful research of the source code that what that means is if no kubeconfig is set in the environment or from the command line option. By the way, we do not support --kubeconfig as a command line option for our klogin thing. That is something that kubectl does support, but we don't support that because it's a redundant addition to just setting the environment variable, and that's by design. I hate that you can do --kubeconfig and that will override an environment variable if you have the environment variable set at the same time. It's absolutely ass backwards. The entire thing is clusterfuck, but whatever. So anyway, we're not doing that. If somebody sets the kubeconfig, then the default destination file is the first file in the path list that can be set for kubeconfig. Everybody remembers kubeconfig can be multiple paths, right? Multiple files. People don't know this, they forget this, and they think it's always pointing to one file. That's not true. The first file, however, is the default destination file if there is a kubeconfig environment variable set. If there is not an environment variable set, then the default destination file is always the .cube/config file in the user's home directory. So making that assumption, let people make that assumption, and they immediately go straight to that file without observing the kubeconfig environment variable properly, and that's wrong. It's broken. Unless you document, we don't do anything like kubectl, we just look in your home directory for that file, then you are not doing it right, because you're not doing it consistent with kubectl, which is what people have become to use. And setting the kubeconfig file, kubeconfig environment variable to point to a specific file is a pretty common practice, so you better damn well support it. That's all I have to say about that. That is the end of the break. I'm going to go ahead and read a couple notes here. Раба, как сделать такое же отгружение терминалов? Отгружение. Отгружение. Что такое отгружение? Не знаю. Как делать такое же отгружение терминалов? Something to do with the terminals. Oh, I think you're talking about cutting and pasting or something. Something to do with my terminals. It's tmux. Anything that I'm doing in the terminal is tmux. Yeah. Someone else asks, am I a Hare Krishna? Yes. I am, but not in the sense of that you probably think. I'm not Hindu. I just really like Hindu music. I like Indian music. I like Ganesha. I love the stories from the Hindu tradition. That's what we've been listening to, by the way, YouTube. So if you hear a little bit of piece of music, that's what that's from. We're listening to Yoga Beach Vibe, which is the common music that I have been playing. There is somebody who asked the question, how am I getting away playing copyright information? The answer is the same way anybody else on Twitch plays copyrighted music. They do it all the time. Just ask any DJ of the millions, thousands of DJs that are out there. They just don't put it in the VOD. And Twitch and the world apparently has decided that's okay. Twitch actually sponsored the addition of that change to the OBS source code so that track would not be saved. Now, I'm not always doing that. Sometimes my tracks are just getting muted or whatever. And I don't care. I mean, the Twitch VODs, they get muted and they get, taken down and stuff like that, and that's cool. The YouTube stuff, however, I make sure as much as possible to not have even like 5 seconds of copyrighted music will get you a shared whatever thing. So that's a big problem, but I don't want to talk about it right now. Well, suppose when people want to use flags to avoid environment variables in Kubernetes for passing in parameters, yes, they do it all the time. So, если у вас был Linux main OS, what terminal do I use? If Linux was my main OS, what terminal do I use? Then whatever's on the machine. I don't install terminals. That's stupid. I only do that on Windows and Mac. On Mac, I install RTerm True. On Windows, I install Windows Terminal Preview. On Linux, I use whatever's there. It makes no sense to me to install Alacrity or whatever the hell. It's just more work. Why is it Kubernetes abbreviated KATES? No idea. Tonify uses Kitty. The Kitty terminal. People use terminals. XFCE terminal is shit. Use whatever you want. I don't care. I don't use XFCE, so maybe that's why. Yeah. I don't want to talk. I mean, we're gonna end up talking forever if we talk about that. That is it, my friends. I gotta get back to work, so I will see you later. Bye, YouTube. See you in an hour or so. Vacation here. You're listening to artifactsrob.tv, and I am coding away. We are making progress on the OIDC login. I factor out the parse target to get the command line options, and I'm about to break out the prompt here, reading from the prompt from the hidden password. Here's a bit of interesting, useful information to somebody out there. If you want to read properly from the terminal, and you don't want it to echo, so you don't want it to, passwords and stuff, right? The standard way to do that in Go is to use the crypto SSH library. I don't know how this became the standard, it just is. But I'm going to show you. I have a couple functions related to this effect that are in my little library here. A prompt that gives you a string, prompt hidden, which reads hidden, read here, new scanner. So this is the standard way, by the way, to read from a line, to read a line of input in. There's like a lot of conflicting information on the internet about how to read a line. That's the proper way to read a line in Go. Open up a buffer.io scanner and read it. Reading hidden information, though, is using the terminal.readPassword library now. And as you can see, this is terminal.readPassword comes from the Golang X crypto SSH terminal. So that's one of those recipes, those idiomatic ways of doing something that you may not know about because it's not well documented, but it's certainly needed. You definitely need to be able to read reliably from the command line. So I think it would be nice if there was a better library that would echo back stars. Anytime you use anything like this in user documentation, you need to be really sure, especially if you got beginning users, to tell them that they're not going to see the password being typed in. I cannot tell you how many times I have had advanced technologists tell me that the code was broke because it's not letting them type anything in, when in fact it was typing in and it just wasn't echoing it to the screen. So just a tip, make sure you put in your documentation that, well, no, it seems obvious, but it's not, I promise, that when you type in to this password field, it will not echo to the screen, but it is reading your input. So a little tip there. A couple comments there. Have you talked about Red Hat and Rocky and Alma Linux previously? Do not want to stir the pot, just asking. A year and a half ago when I set up my home lab, I decided I was trying to evaluate what to run as my core OS, not to be confused with core OS. And I decided to try Rocky. I think there's a pretty big debate about whether to use Rocky or Alma and who's better and such. I tried Alma at first and I didn't like it, and Rocky seems better. Both of them have kind of shitty installers. I really don't like their installing screens. I just don't like that. I would much rather use the Ubuntu server installer. The GUI free terminal installer is much better. So I may actually end up just keeping Ubuntu server as my core hardware OS, even though Red Hat is more prevalent, and therefore Rocky, and everybody should use Rocky and get used to it. Hetanis, HET_TANIS, regular Twitch streamer who does this as well, and they're big into Rocky as well. So, and Het is very, very dependable, reliable operations person, but in the industry doing this and educating for a very long time. So they prefer Rocky. That's my preference. Another comment says, I saw you exit out of Vim and open a new file. Do you ever open multiple files on one Vim instance? Fuck no. No, absolutely not. It's a waste of resources to do that. If I'm going to open up multiple files and switch back and forth, I'll open a tmux pane, which does not limit me to using Vim. People who use Vim panes and open multiple versions in the same thing don't know what the fuck they're doing. I see it all the time, and I'm sorry to state that so strongly, but why would you open up a separate window when I can open up a separate window and go get information? I don't know, GoDoc, NetHTTP, right? And I can go cut and paste from this terminal window and paste that into another non-Vim terminal window, or I can have this be another Vim session and have it be open and cut and paste between Vim. People who use Vim windows and panes are idiots. They're absolute idiots. I'm sorry. If that's you, I think you're an idiot. I probably would have a beer with you anyway, but seriously, it's totally stupid to do that, because you're giving up your ability to have, cut and paste ability from everything, not to mention the fact that you just burned into your muscle memory something that only works on certain versions of Vim that may or may not have support for that, whereas burning screen commands into your muscle memory that work on screen as far back as 1980 and tmux will work everywhere. Cutting and pasting between two windows has been supported in the screen multiplexer since 1980, 81 or something. Why the hell would you not do that? Why would you burn into your muscle memory something that's not even going to work everywhere? The better thing to do is to use tmux that has been screenified so that your fingers memorize the same cut and paste from the terminal that works in screen, that works in tmux, it works in panes and windows, whether or not they're Vim or Emacs or Ed or forever, whatever the hell you want. There. That's all I have to say about that. It's probably time for me to shut up. Here's some more music. I'll go back to working. Okay. That is another hour gone by already. I know it's fast. You're listening to artifactsrob.tv. We are done for the night. We've actually finished the klogin tool completely. It's ready for release internally to my own stuff, and then I'm going to be porting this over and populating it with stuff from my enterprise cluster. I'll be, of course, the code's not identical, so we'll be moving this stuff over. But let me just demonstrate really quickly what it is that we built. We built a tool to update the kubeconfig configuration data across multiple kubeconfig files, wherever they are, and to allow different users to be logged in to a specific reserved cluster name, in this case dev, prod, and inf, and to clean up any of the old entries here. So this actually, if there's any old dev auth info sections, they would be removed automatically. So this it switches to the active context, and it removes anything that's there that hasn't been there before. So the only thing we haven't checked actually is the creation of a new context in the absence of any files at all. So we'll give that a shot in a second. Actually, let's go ahead and do that really fast right now. Let's just copy. Actually, let's just move the home.kubeconfig file into temp. You'll see my context will go to nothing. And now when I call klogin for the first time, let's try with the absolute defaults, which should default to prod, and probably for username, since it can't infer it. It used to be infer from the active current effective user ID, which is a bad idea because it's not always going to be something that's going to be useful. In this case, I can just type RBXRob, which I know is an account over there, and my password for OIDC. And that adds a new entry to the context for the given name, the reserved cluster, and the auth info, which indicates which namespace. It also adds a default namespace that matches the auth info based on our stuff. But if I wanted to change that, I could change the current namespace, and that would, that would keep it. The real magic happens though when we just type klogin, because this is a new day, 24 hours has passed, we need a new token, and we type password and it authenticates, and kget node will show us that we can still get into our node cluster. The things that that had to add a lot of stuff, by the way. Remember that file was completely empty, but because we just moved it, right? And we'll check it now. And now it has a bunch of stuff in it. So it automatically added the certification authority data, which is in the PEM files. And that gets put as a byte slice in there. And then we have the server for the API, which been configured some weeks ago. We have our context here, and it added this individual context here. So and the current context prod. So this file was created automatically by client cmd dot modify config, I think it is, which is the standard runtime CLI function to call and to pass a api.config object, which is also from the standard API. And that does all of the persistence for us automatically. If you want to see that magic, go look at the internal auth.go, log in ROPC, and it talks about how to do that. I'll probably have to review the documents here, but other than this is where all the actual magic happens. So it does the OIDC authentication, and then it creates a new cluster. It deletes any old cluster authentication data that was left over in the auth info section of that. and then commits it. It commits it in this time. It's using it as a single save. We're going to go ahead and release this as, yes, we are not defaulting to kube system. That is horrible. Yeah. Oh yeah, that last bug about which one I was doing. Yeah. So there are a number of things that we want to observe here. So like if I, if I add let's add my other one back. Okay. So if I add .kubeconfig and we add that back, if we add temp config back to kubeconfig, you can see all these contexts here. I mean, these weird ones at the bottom were experimentations with some other naming conventions that I was thinking of using, which we are not going to use. We've decided that's way too silly. And why? Because honestly, your token for a given user is only valid for 24 hours or so anyway. So just using the reserved context names, is more important. So what I mean by that is that I can klogin to EZ, right? And that will, if it doesn't see it, if it sees it in the context column, that's already the default, by the way. So, but if it doesn't see it in the context column, and then it switches to that, right? And of course, it grabs the auth info here, rwxrob at prod, and it inferred the user from it, so I didn't have to type the user every time. It was able to infer it from the auth info. However, if I wanted to change the user on this particular one, I could do that. Now, I am going to break it though. I'm going to break it on purpose. I'm going to use something that it can't support right now. So I tried to put a username at context name, which is not supported. It's not an auth info, right? The only auth infos we supported this, and this. And if any of those auth infos, if I provide an auth info, it will authenticate with that auth info without changing the current context. And it will automatically make any context that use that auth info combination work, which is pretty damn cool. So, because if you wanted to have like 3 or 4 different contexts and you wanted to have them just be different namespaces, you could do that. You wouldn't have to change. There's lots of ways of dealing with this, but there's far fewer options than there used to be because it was just getting kind of crazy. Like, for example, if I want to change the user here on other thing, notice it didn't mess with the namespace, right? It doesn't touch that. So if I do this, this is really cool too. If you tab complete it, this is why we switched to Cobra, because we've got this really complicated, complete the right thing kind of idea. We have completion here is one of the standard commands, so you can add completion to your bash RC or whatever. We have the 3 standard reserved cluster / context names, dev, inf, and prod. So if you just want to be lazy and type that, you can do that. We also load up every supported auth info combination. In this particular case, there is an auth at prod auth info section that is not associated with a context line currently. Let me show you. So, and that, this there's some pretty interesting logic here, but I'm telling you, it's doing the right thing. So we go here, right? If you look under the auth section, you'll see that there are a number of auth tokens here, including Booyah, which is not being displayed, actually. That's interesting. Oh, right. So the reason they're not showing in completion is because the only auth info sections that are allowed for completion are those that end in @dev, or that actually end up resolving to one of the cluster identifiers that we have, right? So that's why Booyah is not showing, even though it's never used anywhere, right? So the thing that's really cool about that is that we are not draconianly destroying people's kubeconfig files if they've done, some kind of out-of-band customizations to their files. That's up to them. They can do it. Before, we would have blown them away, but we're not doing that anymore. So we're going to ahead and do this. So what I'm trying to show here is that other at prod, when we tab complete, it is showing as a valid thing we could log into, because you can log into it. The thing that's really great about that is you could actually log into that auth info before there's ever a context for that. And I considered seriously filtering that out so that that would not be shown. But it is kind of nice to see that, hey, I have another auth info out there hanging around that is not currently associated with any of the contexts, right? In fact, if you do log in with one of those, it will add the context for it because there's no auth info section here. So it will see it as not having a context, and I'm pretty sure it will add it. This is going to be a kind of a live test. Let's see what happens. So if I do an other at prod, I should be able to type it. Oh, nope. Oh, wait, I typed the wrong authorization code. Yeah. All right, so there we go. So, oh, that's curious. Okay, so, wow, that's interesting. Okay, so wow, okay. Well, I mean, that's not unlike what I would want it to do. In fact, it did the right thing. Damn. The only thing it did wrong there was it did overwrite the namespace. Because so what it did is it said, hey, I am an auth info who doesn't have a context, so I will add a new context for my unique identifier for which there already was one. And then it added one, right? Boom, boom. And since it thought it was new, it went ahead and overrode the namespace with other. That's a slight bug, but given the fact that auth info, that other at prod didn't even exist at all, I think it's an acceptable bug. I mean, it's probably going to do the thing that they want anyway, because they most likely are going to want to log in as that user. Now that other is set there, I can actually change the login to something else. I can say, instead of being other at prod, I can say I want RWX at prod, right? And wait, we have to remove this. If there's a context that matches the name, that'll conflict. So let's get rid of that first. So config delete context. Those are old. We're not using those anymore. So yeah, right now that would really screw it up, because it would see it and it would use it as authoritative because it would match the context before the names. But let's just show it what it would want to do now. So now this is very common, right? This is more like what you would actually see. Hey, how's it going? So you would see this more frequently, right? And so then I would want to klogin to other at prod, right? Actually, no, let's do klogin RWX rob at prod, right? Now, if I really wanted to, damn, now I kind of want to add it. If I really wanted to, I could put a user and I could make it intelligently infer that because RWX rob is not one of our standard reserved names, nor is it a context name, that we can assume, klogin can assume, that it is a username for the current context. And if we did that, God, I might have to add that. That's damn cool. Because then I could do this and it would say, so right now it's going to say, I don't know what to do, right? And it would force you to put the, which you can just tab complete and put it on there, right? So you can do put prod on there and password. And so what it did now is it logged me into prod. It changed my user identifier, and it also changed my namespace. So currently it's changing the namespace based on the user. And I think that might actually be a bug. Ask what the user wants to do, right? Well, we're not, yeah. So in this particular case, yeah. In this particular case, I think this is still a bug because we never want to change the namespace entry. We want the namespace entry to remain untouched. I don't know why, but for some reason, there's some faulty logic here that's because whenever you change the user for a given one, it's actually still changing the namespace. So we need to do a detection to see if there's already a matching current namespace and then leave it alone. The point being, though, is that you should be able to swap out your user anytime you want for a given context, so you can have that same user, but you would then go back and forth between two of them. That is a significant difference from what we were doing before. We were qualifying the name of the context as well with the username, and that's where those things came from. I deleted just too much busyness in the context file, so we decided to remove that. So it looks like I am chasing one last bug, which again should not change that. Now, if I use the shortcuts dev, right, it'll just prompt me. So what it's doing is it's finding dev as a cluster name, it's going over here. It's saying, okay, I got dev here. And then it says, okay, I got this here. And it's going to use that username as a default, and it's going to log into that namespace. And because it already exists, it should not be overwriting this. So that should just change over and switch contexts at the same time. Let's do EZ. Same idea, except for this time, you know, and that actually also worked. You notice the namespace was not changed. Now, let me see if I can reproduce the bug. If I change the current user to something else, it should probably override this. I'm guessing it's going to do that because of a bug. I'm going to try that. So that would be artifacts_rob at prod. So if you do that, then it's going to take the current namespace and log in this user. I think, yeah, there's something wrong with the logic there. Yeah. Oh, wow, look at that. That's interesting. Yeah, okay, so that looked at the auth info, assumed it was auth info, and inferred prod, and then blew away the current context and said, I don't want the current context, I'm going to go switch over to that one. I mean, that's not horrible. I don't know, I have to think about that a little bit more. So that'll be the last thing I'm going to work on. Here's some more music. Let me see. Does anybody ask questions that can answer really fast? Hi, Paprika, already doing? Not defaulting to cube system. Yay. A better way to make bash function that takes arguments than getups flags. A bash function that takes arguments and getups flags. Well, I mean, I've been using the control complete -c stuff forever. Now, if you look at my dot files and my scripts under .old, there's an old Twitch API script that uses that. Yeah, you have to. Yeah, there's really not though. Bash scripts are kind of stuck using getup. Yeah. Okay. So that is it for now. We'll talk to you in a bit, but we're very close to being done, and I'm going to go ahead and commit this and bring this into production. You're watching artifactsrob.tv. Hey there, this is artifactsrob.tv. We are done for the night. I just have to wrap up what the latest is. Release 3.0 is coming out. This again is a template. This is designed, I don't know if you can tell, but it's got a little checker box around the name. This klogin tool on artifactsrob/klogin on GitHub is a template, which means it's not designed for you to use as is. It's more designed for you to copy, make your own GitHub repo, and to override the internal clusters package with your own data. And that includes the names of the clusters and the PEM files, which will be embedded for your certificate authority data sections under your clusters in your kubeconfig. I realize that's very dense. If you don't understand Kubernetes or kubeconfig, that'll be very hard to unpack. But that is what it is. This klog project is done. Everything else, this last hour, I went ahead and just did a little bit of sort of icing on the cake sort of stuff. I went ahead and added a -- version, which was just a matter of adding a version to the Cobra command. And I mean, that you get that for free. And I also added 2 persistent flags, user and namespace, so that if you want to switch the user and or the namespace of a context at the same time that you're logging in. So say you're in the dev cluster and you want to log into the prod cluster, but you don't want to stay the same user. You want to also log in as a new user at the same time. You could do --user and put the username, and it will use that as username instead of prompting you. Otherwise, it would use the user from the auth info for the target context that you're trying to go to. If you want to dynamically change the namespace at the same time as well, if you pass --user or namespace without an argument, that will change it as well. But most of the time, you want to go ahead and put that on there. If you leave it off, it'll just change the user and or namespace for the current context and what it logs you in. So that wraps up the end of Klogin and the end of this YouTube video. This is going to be one of the shorter YouTube videos. I think the YouTube version of this video is like going to be under an hour. So I've imagined a lot of YouTube people are going to be a lot much happier. However, if you want to see me doing this stuff live and you have questions and you have comments you want to make, you're going to have to come on into the Twitch chat or to the Discord or to Beginner Boost or any number of things. Speaking of which, in 2 days at 11 o'clock a.m., we're going to have the Beginner Boost again. We will be picking up where we left off and doing Vim RC configuration. So that should be fun. As fun as you can get as being a Linux terminal masochist, or sorry, as a sadist. It's masochist, right? I can't remember. One of them hurts others, and the other one hurts themselves. I can never remember the two. Anyway, that's all for me, YouTube. Take care. If the rest of you want to stick around, I'm going to be riding on my bike. That's why I'm on my standing desk now. I'm converting over to ride on my bike. I'm going to be doing some Zwift hill climbing. I'm going to try to get some of the stages in Zwift, and I've been putting the music on and just chilling and talking about something besides Linux and technology. Tomorrow morning I'll be on probably a little bit later, since I have stuff to do internally at work that I won't be able to do necessarily live. But I don't know. I might go live anyway and just put some music on in the background so we can all hang out and listen and chat. So. Bye, YouTube.